Part 3 of the Temple and Timaeus series audio version of the chapter from Margaret Barker's book The Great High Priest. The audio is AI clone of my voice. Pythagoras also taught about the music of the spheres, later understood to mean the sound of the moving heavenly bodies. Criticized by Aristotle on the heavens. B9290B12. The theory that the movement of the stars produces a harmony is nevertheless untrue. This resembles the Hebrew tradition of the Song of the Angels, who were thought of as the stars. Job, which has preserved much from the earlier period, mentions the song of these stars angels at the moment of the creation. When I laid the foundation of the earth, the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job 38:4. Later temple tradition linked music to cosmic harmony and renewal, and those who stood in the presence had to learn the song of the angels, e.g. Apabre 17.57, where Abraham has to sing the song that IOL taught him. The heavenly music was the song of renewal, the sound which restored the creation, and it was the characteristic music of the Holy of Holies. In the older account of the creation recorded in Proverbs 8, wisdom is the one who holds things together in harmony. Harmozusa. The inconsistencies in later interpretations of Pythagoras' theory of cosmic music suggest that this concept has nothing to do with mathematical or musical theory but comes from a deeper root, in mythology, not in science. A widely attested tradition also associates Pythagoras with the numerical ratios of musical intervals. His musical theory was closely related to numerical cosmology, and Burkert believes that it may have been the potency of music to influence the human spirit that made this study a major element in the quest for the secrets of the universe. Since the temple and tabernacle were both thought to replicate the measures of the creation, it is interesting that several people have noted the relationship between the proportions of the temple and the musical scale. The cube, with all its sides of equal length, was the note of unison, and the measurements of the great hall, in addition to those of the Holy of Holies, expressed in ratios of architectural proportion the same musical tones which were implicit in the unison or fundamental note of the Holy of Holies. One can prove nothing. The builders of the temple may not even have been aware of the significance of the measurements they used, but it is a fact that the measurements of the temple were deemed to be a part of the mystery of the creation, and they do fit the proposed theories of harmony. The characteristic calendar of the temple was also related to music. The harmony of space expressed in the structure of the temple found an equivalent embodiment in the Israelites' annual divisions of time. The 7-based calendar system with the 7-day week, and then the 7 weeks between Passover and weeks, and then the festivals of new wine and new oil at further intervals of 7 weeks. Then the Sabbath year after 7 years, and the Jubilee in the 50th year after 7 times 7 years. 7 was, without any doubt, the sacred number, and yet the culmination of this calendrical system was 50, 7 times 7 plus 1. The Sabbath year and the Jubilee were regarded as fundamental laws revealed to Moses on Sinai, Lever 25:1, and therefore they must have been a part of the great vision of the creation which Moses had to replicate in the tabernacle. Strahan has argued that this system of 49 and 50 was based on the concept of musical harmony. 7 complete octaves, which should correspond to 12 musical fifths, in fact do not, but differ by what is known as the Pythagorean comma, one of the greatest mysteries of the science of sound. Tame suggested that this discrepancy was known to the ancient philosopher-musicians, who accepted that the harmony of mortal music was imperfect, and thus a sign of human imperfection. The comma is not a slight interval less than the 7 octaves, but in excess of them. In the ancient world this was widely conceived as a symbol of renewal. Strahan suggested that it is this extra which explains the 50th year, the Jubilee, the addition to the 7 times 7 years. The significance of the Jubilee would certainly fit the idea of restoring the cosmic harmony, since the Jubilee was a conscious return to the time and state when the Creator had finished his work and saw that everything was good. The Pythagorean comma could also account for the disputes between the advocates of the solar and the lunar calendar, the first temple and the second. The ratio of the solar year, 365, 6 days, to the lunar year 354.7 days is almost exactly the ratio of the Pythagorean comma, the perceived distinction between heavenly and earthly harmony, perfection and imperfection. The first temple had used a solar heavenly calendar, as did the priestly group at Qumran, whose lifestyle resembled that of the Pythagoreans. 11 fragments of their calendar were found, Q3 to 1233, and the temple scroll shows that their year was divided into 7 periods of 50 days. In their hymns they sang of the law of the great light of heaven, the certain law from the mouth of God, 1 Codex formerly twice, and they also used the Book of Jubilees, an alternative version of Genesis calculated in terms of jubilees. Those whom they regarded as the apostate used the lunar calendar, proof of their fallen state. Iamblichus records that what pertains to computation in numbers was discovered in Phoenicia, and according to Neugebauer, the origin of the Greek alphabetical number system must have originated whilst the Greeks were still using the full Phoenician alphabet, as 3 letters which did not survive in the classical Greek alphabet continued in use as numbers. He suggested Miletus in Asia Minor and the 8th century BCE as the time and place for adopting these numbers. The practice of using Phoenician letters as numbers would then have been an established practice in the time of Pythagoras, and the root of his mathematics was also linked to Phoenicia. This could be no more than coincidence, but for the later Hebrew tradition of describing the creation in terms of letters. The best known example is from the much later 3 Enoch 13, where Metatron, the exalted and transformed Enoch, describes his crown on which were inscribed the letters by which heaven and earth were created. In so far as they were on his high priestly crown, they would have been the 4 letters of the name, but other sources record that all 22 letters were used to create. The setting of this scene is important. Enoch Metatron is being transformed into a heavenly prince, exalted above the angels of day 1, 3 to 19. This is a development of the royal rituals in the Holy of Holies, which appear elsewhere as the traditions of Moses on Sinai. Now on Sinai, Moses was told the law, the plan for the tabernacle, the future history of his people, and all the measurements of the creation, 2 Baruch 59. Josephus said of the tabernacle, having described its precise measurements, this proportion of the measures of the tabernacle proved to be an imitation of the system of the world. Antrage 364. This is where we must look for the roots of the Pythagorean link between science and religion, or between ethics and mathematics. The confusion about Pythagoras' use of numbers may stem from the ambiguities of the Hebrew word sefer, which can mean far more than just number. Words from this root can mean cipher, or story, or account, or decree or law book, to count and to describe. If Pythagoras taught that all things were number, this may have arisen from the structure of the Hebrew language. To count and to describe are the same verb, number and story are the same word. This would be consistent with another curiosity about the teaching of Pythagoras. The odd number was good and the even number was not. This is contrary to the natural sense of these words in Greek, where artios, even number, has the meaning of complete, perfect, precise, and perissos. Odd number has the meaning of excessive, surplus, or superfluous. Thus, Greek terminology for even and odd is in its tendency diametrically opposite to the Pythagoreans' number theory. It is generally agreed that Pythagoras' teachings originated outside Greece. The range of meanings of the Hebrew spar is consistent with Iamblichus' view that what pertains to computation in numbers was discovered in Phoenicia. Burckhardt also suggested that the Pythagoreans were the first to connect mathematics and philosophy. Kirk expressed this as the bond between religion and science. Religion and science were not, to Pythagoras, 2 separate departments, between which there was no contact, but rather 2 inseparable factors in a single way of life. He quoted Proclus on Euclid. Pythagoras turned geometrical philosophy into a form of liberal education by seeking its first principles in a higher realm of reality. Several passages in Aristotle even suggest a close connection in Pythagoreanism between mathematics and ethics. It might be more accurate to say that Pythagoras was keeping to the older ways, that he did not separate mathematics, philosophy, and ethics. The only biblical writer who claims to have been a priest in the first temple is Ezekiel, since his prophecies are dated exactly to the period when Pythagoras could have been in Palestine. Anything in them will be of great significance. Ezekiel has no obvious account of the creation, but there is a long and detailed description of the temple. Since the tabernacle temple was built to represent the creation, what he says about the temple will indicate something of his understanding of the creation. The recurring emphasis is on the measurements. Ezekiel sees an angel with a line of flax and a measuring reed, Ezek 30.3, and he learns exactly how the temple should be and how the land should be. Everything is in terms of measurements. He has to give the people an accurate account of what he has seen, in order that may be ashamed of their iniquities, and measure the proportion measurement. Hedo teach them the form of the house and its proportion, its exits and entrances, and all its forms and all its statutes, engraved things, and all its forms and all its laws. He has to write them before their eyes, so that they keep all the form and all the statutes and do them. Ezek 10:11, translating literally. Two of the words used here, srh, qt, are words to consider carefully. Srh is used elsewhere to indicate the heavenly form, and words related to hqq, hqh are used in the older accounts of the creation, as we have seen, to indicate the fixed order and limits of what has been established. It is possible that what Ezekiel sees here is the measurements of the temple as the heavenly pattern which the whole of creation and human society has to copy. Making people ashamed of their iniquities implies more than a simple deviation in the matter of temple architecture. Ezekiel seems to describe the measurements and proportions which the temple exemplifies, and so the form and the fixed order of the temple issues in the fixed orders and laws of society. Ezekiel's vision of measurements includes not only the temple, but also the just division of the land, Ezek date, and the just basis of commerce, with fair weights and measures, Ezek 10:12. This is consistent with the evidence in later sources as to what Moses had learned on Sinai. Given that this Moses tradition had absorbed the older Holy of Holies tradition, Moses learned the laws for human society, the prescriptions for the tabernacle, which represented the creation, and the measurements of the sanctuary, the abyss, the winds, the raindrops, the air, the eras of history, the angels. Moses also learned about judgment, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, 2 Baruch 59:4-11. The secrets of the older Holy of Holies had concerned the mystery at the heart of creation, and this was the measurements of creation and history, and the rules for society. The older biblical account of the creation set out clearly in Proverbs 8:22-31, Isaiah 40:12-24, and Job 26:38, but apparent elsewhere too in older texts, also centered on numbers, the weight of the wind and the measure of the waters, Job 28:25, the dimensions of the foundations of the earth and the number of the clouds, Job 38:5-37. Measurements were important: limit, height, depth, breadth, Job 11:7-9. Isaiah depicted the power of the Creator in terms of his measuring. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked of the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales? Isa 30:12. He brings out the stars by number, Isa 30:26. The Lord measured the earth, Hab 3:6. The nations of the world were divided up to correspond to the number of the sons of God, Duet 32:89. The boundary or limit was also fundamental to this older system. The disordered was limited and defined by engraving and fixing. This process is indicated by the words from the root HQQ used by Ezekiel in the context of the correct form of the temple, and the laws which express this. This is exactly what Ezekiel implied. The statutes had been broken. The anointed angel figure who was thrown from heaven was described as the seal of perfection, or the one who sealed the measurement proportion, Ezekiel 8:12-80. Interesting in the light of the word play in the Gospel of Philip. Messiah has two meanings: the anointed one or the measured, cg 2 Fighters 2:1. Philo described the Logos as the seal, the archetypal idea, archetypos idea, the pre-measure prometrics of all things, Q Genesis 1:4. The measurements of the temple and the temple city continued to be important, as can be seen from the fragments of the New Jerusalem text found at Qumran. The Mishnah Tractate Middath, which is entirely devoted to temple. Measurements and the usage in the Merkava text, where measurement, middah, has the sense of mystery. Akiva, my son, descend and bear witness of this measurement mystery, middah, to the creatures. Then our Akiva descended and taught the creatures this mystery measurement, middah. It would be interesting to know what mysteries the young Pythagoras had learned, especially as Iamblichus observed in his Life of Pythagoras. It is said that what pertains to computation and numbers was discovered in Phoenicia. There is no hint of these measurements in Genesis 1. All that remains of the older system is the emphasis on dividing and separating. The unity of day 1 manifested itself in the visible world as a diversity. There is an unmistakable similarity, though, between the process of creation as described in Genesis 1 and teaching, attributed to Pythagoras. The unlimited, unitary, and undifferentiated was outside the heaven, and penetrated the world by being breathed in by the heaven, to separate natural things, few size, from one another, being enclosed and partitioned off in a polembanomenon, in the limited. If one understands heaven as the veil of the temple, and the undifferentiated unity as day 1, the Holy of Holies, then the Spirit coming through the veil in order to bring life and to separate according to their kinds makes a striking similarity. The older Hebrew system appears in greater detail in the non-canonical text. Timaeus Baruch 59:4-12 lists the weights, measures, and quantities of the creation revealed to Moses on Sinai. The similitudes of Enoch show this knowledge in its original context, the Holy of Holies. Enoch stands by the throne and show the kingdom is divided, 1:41:1, i.e. how the unity is separated out into the creation. He then saw how the winds were divided, and the fixed orbits of the sun and moon, the weighing of the stars, and the proportions of their light, 1:43:2. There is a similar list in 1 Enoch 60, the first and the last in heaven, the height, the depth, how the winds are divided and weighed, the power of the light of the moon, and the division of the stars. Such knowledge is promised to the righteous at the end of the 7th week in the apocalypse of weeks, the breadth and length of the earth and the measure of all of them, the height of heaven and on what it is founded, and how great is the number of the stars and where the luminaries rest, 1:93:11. Nothing can be proved, but there are striking similarities between the teachings attributed to Pythagoras and his disciples, and the traditions of the first temple priesthood. This can be seen even more clearly in Plato's Timaeus, widely believed to depict Pythagorean beliefs. Pythagoras and his disciples, and the traditions of the first temple priesthood. This can be seen even more clearly in Plato's Timaeus, widely believed to depict Pythagorean beliefs.